Hello and welcome back to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers. I just want to apologize initially here today. It is very windy out right now. I live in Northwest Montana. It is very cold. We've had, sub-zero temperatures and such, a lot of snow. And today we're dealing with wind and it's causing, shovels and flags and doors to bang around outside and stuff. So if you hear any background noise, that's probably what that is. And I just wanted to apologize in advance. Thank you again for those that are returning listeners. If you've listened to the last two podcasts talking about how I made some feature films, today we're going to start diving into the nitty gritty and breaking down each step of the filmmaking process, at least from an independent level, because that's all I can relate to. I've never been a studio filmmaker. As of right now, I have no desire to be a studio filmmaker, and that might bite me in the butt, later on. But as of right now, I love my independence. And the reason why is because I enjoy every step of the process. I enjoy the writing. I enjoy producing. I enjoy directing. I enjoy running camera, the editing, visual effects. I love everything about this, and I want to be able to do all of it. That's why I got into this in the first place, is because I love it so much. And if I worked in the studio system, I get pigeonholed into, director. Maybe I could be a writer director, but it's very difficult to become a writer editor. Hollywood doesn't like directors editing their own stuff for whatever reason. So, and it's just the way the system is set up. So I like my independence. And so everything I talk about comes from that point of view of being an independent filmmaker. You're doing every job yourself. And that's what my book is all about. Indie Rebel, a masterclass in independent filmmaking. You can find the thing on Amazon, get it in print, get it in digital, whatever you want. And it is going to be the basis for our next probably 20 or so podcasts. Because every week I'm going to go through and take a chapter, and we're making a companion podcast for the chapter, and that's what you guys are listening to right now. So this week's topic is, drumroll, might replace that with an actual drumroll effect. We'll see how I feel. Story. All right. Story is crazy. I did a blog post on this years ago. It's so weird to think about that my livelihood revolves around something that we cannot see or taste or touch or, anything really other than hear, but we can feel it. We can't touch stories, but stories can touch us. And that's always just, I don't know, it mystified me to a degree. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Stories often begin as an idea in somebody's head, and it usually starts as what I call the what if statement. What if this? What if that? For instance, referencing a couple films we've already talked about, what if Little Red Riding Hood was set in modern times and the wolf was a cannibal named Wolf? Okay, there's my what if statement for a story. What if I combine parkour with what I was learning about the last days from the Bible? Well, there's your bit for leap. Here's one for a short film I did. What if a woman shooting zombies in the zombie apocalypse is really just the imagination of a little girl playing with a BB gun in her backyard? And I actually took that and I turned that into a short film for a 1-minute short film competition. So, point being, most of the time, these stories start as just these what if ideas. What if this? What if that? Well, that could be interesting. And it's just this little hint of a nugget of an idea. And at least for me, I can't speak for everyone else, but I know that for myself, I don't seek them out. I'm not constantly saying, all right, I'm looking at the world around me. What kind of what ifs do I see here? They usually just kind of come to me. The one about Little Red Riding Hood came to me, as I was folding clothes in the fitting room at an Old Navy in Spokane, Washington. It just was there, kind of a thing. Now, I do firmly believe that we all have stories within us. We all have these what if ideas. You may have even thought of them and not even known that that's what that was when that thought occurred to you. But the real challenge for us as filmmakers is, how do we take these what if ideas, these little stories that we're starting to mess with in our heads, and how do we turn them into movies? And that's what we're going to start to talk about today. As I mentioned, this episode is based off the first chapter in my book, Indie Rebel, a masterclass in independent filmmaking. Go get it on Amazon. The podcast is so young, we don't have sponsorship. So, yes, I'm pimping out my own book. But I think that's okay because this all goes hand in hand. And I think it's full of a lot of good information. This is the information I would have wanted to know when I was starting out, gosh, over 20 years ago. I hate saying that. That makes me feel so old. All right. Let's backtrack just a little bit here and talk about the kind of the history of movies. And I'm not going to go into like a total deep dive on it, but just like really quick surface level Cliff Notes version. Movies, is short for moving pictures. And that's what movies were back in the day. They were just moving pictures. It was people going about their lives and doing the most mundane things possible. And the general audience was willing to pay to see it because of the novelty factor. It was something they hadn't seen before. It was new. This idea of pictures that could move was very exciting to them. And yeah, they would pay a penny or a nickel to go do it. In fact, actually, they didn't get projected originally on big screens. It was like a little light box you had to look into and turn a crank to run the film yourself. And they were called Nickelodeons because it cost exactly a nickel to get in and view the film. And probably one of the most famous Nickelodeon films was The Death of Mary, Queen of Scots. And it has one of the first special effects in cinema history. And we can talk about that another time, but it's very cool if you ever want to go look that one up. It looks horrible, of course, by today's standards, but just knowing that that's where we came from and look at the stuff that we can do now, it's just mind-blowing. So eventually, the novelty factor began to wear off of, the moving picture idea, and gags and jokes started becoming really popular. Slapstick started to become popular. But with that, telling a story started to become popular. One of the most famous examples of a narrative story from early on was The Great Train Robbery. That was a movie that was actually projected on a big screen, and people swore that a train was about to run into the movie theater. And the filmmakers did that very deliberately, using some two-way mirrors and stuff to shoot a train almost running over the camera. And then also you've got like, a Trip to the Moon, I think is what it was called, by Millet. And that one also told a narrative story. Now, they're short films because at the time they were especially limited by finances and such. But we see the groundwork being laid out for how this all works. And we see that there is a market for people wanting drama. And if you want to learn a lot about drama, go watch any behind-the-scenes interview with Alfred Hitchcock. He cracks me up. He says, "Frankly, I've always had a sense of drama." And he says it in the most slow tone possible. But if you watch his work, you know that he's telling the truth. Like I alluded to earlier, everyone's going to have their own process when it comes to developing a story. I'm simply going to share mine and what's worked for me. I've tried a lot of different techniques over the years, and I'm going to try to cover a lot of them today as we go about this. I always start with that what if idea. What if this? What if that? And what I will usually do is I'll take that what if idea, and I've got a notes page in my phone and on my computer where I can just go and I add it to a list. And I've got like 100 items on the list right now of these what if ideas. And it's one of those things where if I ever need an idea for something, I can go back to my list and I can pull from it. And the great thing about doing it on the phone in the Notes app is I've always got my phone with me. And the Notes app syncs to my MacBook Air, which is what I do all my writing and pre-production on. So everything is synced up. It just works very well together. When I add an item to my what if list, I don't care if it's a short film idea or a feature film idea. I just put it in the same spot because you never know, down the road, I might have an idea for a short film that could be based on one of my feature what if ideas. And likewise, it might work the other way around. I might be able to take a feature and turn it into a short, or turn a short into a feature. I mean, like it's fluid. It goes both directions there. So having this list is extremely helpful and extremely valuable. And at any given time, I'm constantly bouncing between 2 or 3 of these ideas for my list in my head. I try to review my list at least once a week. I just quickly look over all the items I have in there, and it just keeps things bubbling around. And what I'm really trying to do is I'm bouncing these ideas around in my head is I'm trying to find out what excites me the most, or if certain subject matters or things I find are just popping up more often in my life, then I'm going to pay attention to those. And it really is important when you're doing this as a filmmaker to choose an idea that excites you. If you're a novelist or just a screenplay writer, it probably doesn't matter as much. But if you're the filmmaker, you got to realize you're going to be married to this thing if you decide to put it into production for like probably up to the next 2, maybe even more years of your life. I know in my case, about 2 years is what it takes to go from conception to completion. And if I'm not excited about it, then I'm going to lack the motivation to probably finish the thing at some point down the road. I can share an example from some short films I did years and years ago. I just gotten out of high school, and I had an idea for a first movie, and it was going to be a girl gets kidnapped, and through the process of Stockholm Syndrome, falls in love with the kidnapper, and they run away to go live together. And I was like, okay, and it was cool idea, and I was somewhat excited about it. But then I did kind of a precursor to this, and I did a short film that was more of a horror film about a girl's experience on Halloween night. And then suddenly I fell in love with horror and scaring people, and now I wasn't so excited about this Stockholm-based drama anymore. And I was like, ooh. And then I did a sequel to the drama before I'd even shot the drama. I did a sequel where the girl dies, and that was the Red Riding Hood thing I mentioned earlier. That short film was the third part in a series, or it became the third part in a series. I came up with part 2 first, and that was the longest one at 20 minutes long. But it ended up being the last one I shot, and I feel like it suffered the most because I just didn't put the love and care into it because I was no longer excited about it anymore. I was more excited about the Red Riding Hood thing that came about from doing the other short film initially at the beginning, part 1, introducing the character. So that's why I say if you're coming up with your list of ideas, you really just got to be bubbling them around in your head and find the one that excites you the most. Because like I said, you're going to be married to it for a couple of years. Now, another thing you need to keep in mind, especially being an independent filmmaker, if you're a writer, this does not apply to you. If that's all you're doing is writing movies, just skip this next section or listen to it, but realize, you can sit back and laugh and be, haha, suck to be a filmmaker. If you're an independent filmmaker, you need to keep your skill set in mind as you're dreaming up these ideas. It's okay to dream big and to think up of like the next Avatar or Star Wars or something like that you will probably never have the budget to do. And that's okay. Set that movie aside on the back burner. Don't stop yourself from coming up with the idea and even dreaming about it for a little bit. But when you're going to know that you're going into production and that you have to make this thing yourself, take your skill set into mind and take your resources, into account too. I know that I am good with visual effects, and so that does free me up a little bit. I can do some things that maybe other filmmakers, and especially filmmakers just starting out, are not able to do. Because I don't have to find a visual effects artist to take care of it. I'm the guy. I know what I can do, and I try to write that into my films. This also leads into what many filmmakers commonly call the Rodriguez list, but I call it the X factor. And what the X factor is taking stock of things you have around you. What are some cool locations you've got? What are some cool items you have that could be props? What are some skills you might have? Those are your X factors. X factors are things that are going to help set your movie apart from other independent films. When Robert Rodriguez wrote El Mariachi, he had access to a couple of trucks, he had access to a ranch, a guitar case, and a small border town in Mexico. And so he wrote the movie about those things. So that's why this is called the Rodriguez list. Kevin Smith was a convenience store clerk when he wrote a movie called Clerks about 2 guys sitting behind the counter harassing customers all day. And he knew that he had access to the convenience store. So he said, I'm going to make a movie about that. My X factor, I'm going to tell you what my X factors are. These are things that I feel are special to me and things that I can always pull upon now to make a film. I have a house on 10 acres of land with a pond. And it's a wooded, forested area. So immediately now I know going forward, if I needed like a really cool, idea for a location for a movie, I'm going to start it based on a house in the middle of nowhere. Or I could do something off in the forest and that kind of a thing. I have access to 2 pickup trucks. I do have 2 pickup trucks. I've got a 93 F250 and I've got a 2001 Dodge Ram. I have various firearms. Later in another podcast, we'll talk about firearms and stunts and safety and stuff with those, but just know that I have access to a bunch of like cool guns I can put in a film. I have archery skills and equipment. I can teach somebody how to shoot or at least make it look like they know how to shoot. With that, I have visual effects skills. I have access to plenty of mountain locations around me. I've got rivers, I've got a forest, I've got parkour abilities. I'm a licensed skydiver. I have a canoe, and I have a martial arts background. So it's a very random, eclectic collection of stuff, but they're all things that I can pull upon to make my movie a little bit more special. And that's why I call them the X factors. And so keep that in mind when you're starting to plan your film. Now, we've got a list of ideas that we can talk about. You've got a couple kind of jumbling around in your head, right? Things that you're like, hey, these are things that I could actually do. How do you fully decide which one is best? Like, let's say you've got 2 or 3 that really excite you and you're not sure how to choose. This is where pitching comes in. And we're not pitching to try to get somebody on board with the project. We're just pitching to see how the film is received by the general public. So for me, when I start pitching a new movie idea, my first target is my wife. She's married to me. She's signed up for this. She knew what she was getting into. And I'll tell her about these ideas. I'm not going to tell you my ideas because they're my ideas and I want to keep them for myself to use someday when I'm either able to or I want to. But there's been about 3 or 4 ideas in the last 6 months I've ran through by her and gotten some good feedback off of them. My next target is a good friend of mine. He was the best man at my wedding. He's a good buddy, Chris Trechter. I actually hope to have him on this podcast eventually because he's got a bit of a background in film and a big interest in it. But more importantly, he's running a video production class at a middle school in Spokane, Washington, and doing some really amazing, incredible things with these students and the stuff that they're able to turn out. And he's now also incorporating a cinema aspect into the class where they have to make short films. So eventually I'm going to have him on the podcast so we can talk about that. But because he and I, we go back 15, almost 20 years, we're always bouncing ideas off each other left and right. And being like, well, that's a cool idea. And then have you thought about this? Or what if this happens? Again, coming back to that what if statement. This whole process is based around what if. And it's just mind boggling to think about sometimes. So start pitching your ideas. And what you want to do when you're pitching this is you want to get it concise. You don't want to run someone through 20 minutes of what story, which would basically be like a treatment. We'll talk about treatments in just a moment. What you want to do is you want to get this down to like 2 or 3 sentences. Make it as concise as possible and see what that person's interest level is. That's how you're going to start to figure out of the ideas you're most excited for, which one is everybody else most excited for. There's been times where I pitch ideas to people and maybe it's too soon in the process and I'm not able to fully articulate in 2 or 3 sentences what the movie's about. And they're like, okay. And I'm a little bit heartbroken because I know in the back of my head, this could be a good idea, but I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to start pitching it yet. So that one goes on to the back burner. I come up with a different idea. I pitch that to them. They're like, wow, that sounds amazing. Hey, cool. This is one maybe I should look at moving forward with. I should go forward with that plan and that idea. The final thing I want to talk about this initial idea phase is also, there's an old adage, write what you know. And this is important on 2 levels. If you are the filmmaker, you're going to be able to tell the story that much more authentically because you've lived through that experience of whatever it is you're trying to tell. It might not be the exact experience that we see on screen, but some variation of it that allows the story to be told very authentically. If you're just a writer, the same thing does apply. You want to write what you know. If you've never been in a relationship or never been in a divorce, don't write about those things. It's going to come off as just immature and bad, for lack of a better term. Like, I can remember in my early days wanting to write like either action movies or I wanted to have like a romance thing going on in one of my movies. But at the time, I never even had a girlfriend before. I was not qualified to write about that because all I knew about relationships really had come from movies. And so it's just another retreading, rehashing of the same thing that's already been done. So get yourself some life experience, and then you're going to be able to tell your stories more authentically. I do parkour. I can write about that world. I'm a licensed skydiver. I can write about that world too. I am not a coal miner. I know nothing about that. It would be very difficult for me to write about coal mining, and I would probably have to do a lot of research and development ahead of time about the lives of coal miners before I would even attempt a story like that. Now, if you're just starting out, you're fresh out of high school, maybe you're in high school, first year of college, whatever, you don't have a lot of life experience, and that is the sad fact. So don't try to write something that you don't know about. Instead, say, what do I know? What do I have experience with? And can I make a movie about that? Maybe you and your buddies were a bunch of skateboarders back in the day. Well, that's a cool setting, and you can deal with what these kids go through on a day-to-day basis. Their teenage angst and possibly dealing with drugs and stuff. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But really, it's super important to write what you know, and that goes back to also now coming up with your ideas that you're going to produce into a film. Make sure that whatever topic that you do is something that you already know a lot about. So that's my long way of trying to say that. All right, so let's move this story forward. No pun intended here. Once I feel like I've gravitated towards an idea, now's the time to start fleshing it out. I've pitched it to my wife. I've pitched it to a friend, maybe a couple other random people that I hardly know. I know it's something I know a little bit about. It's now time to start actually turning this little seed of an idea into something more tangible. Sometimes I'll start with a log line. A log line is one or two sentences that sum up your film. For instance, Blake Owens was never one for religion, but all that changes when he has a run-in with his high school sweetheart who shares some exciting truths about Bible prophecy with him, putting him at odds with his parents as they go about living the last days and witness the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's my log line for the movie that I'm finishing up right now. It sums up the entire movie beautifully. It also took me a long time to get to that point where I'm able to make it so concise. Fortunately, if you've been pitching your idea around to people, you should have distilled your idea into something very basic and small that is easy to digest at the same time. I might also go about writing a treatment, and I've done this before, and this actually used to be my favorite way to plan a movie. A treatment is just a really long synopsis of the entire film. My treatments averaged about 4 to 5 pages, I would say on average. I've written treatments for movies I have not produced, and I've written treatments for movies that I have produced. Wolf, my first feature, started as a treatment. Well, I mean, you know the real genesis of it, but when it came time to actually write the movie, I started with the treatment. The first Leap movie, I started with the treatment. Leap 2, I did a little bit differently, and I started that one with just an outline. An outline is more of a abbreviated treatment. A treatment might contain fully fleshed out scenes where you're describing in great detail about certain things. And if you are a novelist or, consider yourself a writer first, I think treatments are a great way to go because you get to play in that world and be as descriptive as you want without going into all the nuances of, writing the script and such and really paying attention to story structure. For me, I'm very ADHD. I need a little more help than that, I've realized. And I think that it shows over the years as my writing process has changed, the movies have consistently gotten better, not just from a technical standpoint, but from a story standpoint too, which is what we're talking about here today, right? So here's my current workflow when it comes to writing and planning a movie. My favorite app for this is called Freeform. It is available on Mac and iOS. So if you've got an iPhone or iPad, you should be able to find it on there too. And it will sync between them. If I start something on my phone because I'm out and about, I can open it back home on my MacBook Air and it pick up right where I left off. So Freeform is a virtual whiteboard. You can make sticky notes that double as index cards, because we've all heard about the classic index card method of planning your movie on index cards. So this is a virtual way of doing that. You can color code these sticky notes or index cards. And then you can also like draw free stuff. If you just have a random doodle idea for something you want to throw in there, you can do that. You can draw connecting lines. So if you're putting out like plot points and beats and such, you can connect one to the next and show how things are starting to link together. And then my favorite feature is actually being able to link to websites that contain research pertaining to what I'm doing. I do a lot of R&D on any movie I do. Even if it's something I already know about, I still go and I research as much as I can about it. And I do think that that's very important. And so in FreeFlow, having quick access links kind of like serving as bookmarks is great, because I'm like, oh yeah, what's that Wikipedia page for Ouija boards? Click on that, and that takes me right to there. Oh, what does the Vatican think about demonic possession? Click on that, and it takes me right there. It's kind of like having bookmarks in your web browser, but I'm not having to organize them through different folders because it's all contained in this idea and planning document. So, yeah, Freeform is just like super, super cool when it comes down to this. One of the other things I like to do in Freeform is I will create a card or a beat, or a sticky note, sorry, for each character in the film. And at that point, I discuss what their character traits are. What do they look like? What's their personality? What are their flaws? And what are their goals and objectives? Like, what do they want? Every character in your film needs to want something, even if it's just at an emotional level, like to be loved or to be welcomed or appreciated. Every character has to have a need, and that's going to help drive them forward and make your characters more rich in color because they have a driving force now. It could just be, they're a treasure hunter and they want the gold. Well, they want the gold. That's what they want. They'll stop at nothing to get it. Lara Croft kind of falls into that category, doesn't she? She may not be the most three-dimensional character out there, no pun intended, because of the video games, but she, at a core level, is just like, I want that. It is mine, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it. And you'll find, look at any character that stands out to you in a movie, they've got the same thing. Even in dramas, the characters want something. They want to seduce their partner. They want a partner in the first place. Maybe they want a child or something. I don't know. I mean, everybody has wants and desires and needs, and we, as the writer, need to play to that. It's going to make your characters that much more relatable to the audience and not seem so flat and two-dimensional. So by now, your freeform document should be very cluttered. It should have a lot of stuff going on with it. You should have a list of characters and what their desires and motives and stuff like that are. You should have a list of maybe some key plot points you want to hit in your film, some things that you want to accomplish and try to tackle. And then you should have some research material off to the side. I want to apologize in advance. If you are on Windows or Android only, you don't have access to any of the Mac stuff. I don't know of a equivalent to this. Maybe Evernote. I used Evernote like a decade ago, and I think it had some good features that would kind of work for something like this. I'm not sure, though. You might know your own version, and if you do, leave them in the show notes below and let us know what you found on Windows and Android if that's your pre-production system. I've mentioned before, I'm not a Mac addict. I have an iPhone and a MacBook Air, but I also have Linux computers, and I have a custom-built Windows PC that I use for all my heavy lifting when it comes to editing. So I do use all three platforms, but for pre-production and story development, I love the Mac system. It works so well. It's designed for creative people, and it does a good job at that. So you've got your full document of notes and random ideas. Let's put this together now. What I now choose to do is I open up a final draft document, and this is available on Mac or Windows. You could keep doing this in whatever note-taking app you are currently working in to brainstorm your ideas, but I like doing this in final draft because that's also where I'm going to be writing the script. And so I can very easily click a button and I'm just flipping between views, and I can even bring up both views simultaneously in the same application and not have to be running two applications at the same time. So I open up Final Draft, and the first thing I do is I switch over to the beatboard. And this is in versions 11 and newer, I think. I don't think the beatboard was in Final Draft 10. I'm not positive. Don't quote me on that. I'm currently using Final Draft 13, and that's what I choose to use. One quick note on Final Draft here. It is the industry standard. Most people in Hollywood are using it. That doesn't mean that you have to use it to write your scripts. Next week, when we talk about screenwriting, I'm going to give you a whole list of different applications that you can use. A lot of them are way more affordable than Final Draft. The retail price tag on Final Draft is $250, but you can routinely get it for $170 and sometimes even less than that. But don't feel like that you have to use Final Draft to follow along with us here. Just know that really what I'm doing is I'm creating a new whiteboard, and I'm going to start planning some stuff out in this new whiteboard instead of my messy one that I had before. So I'm in the Final Draft beatboard, and I'm going to create a couple different index cards right off the bat. I'm going to create one that says Act 1, one that says Act 2, and one that says Act 3. This was the first form of story structure that I ever learned, and so it's really ingrained into like my being in psychosis and the way I tell stories. And basically, it's just a simple way of saying you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm going to space those out horizontally on my screen. Above it, I might add the movie title or whatever the working title is. And then I'll also add another card with the log line that I've come up with. And that's just something to remind me as I go to kind of guide and direct it, the direction that I'm heading with the thing. So let's talk about Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 real quick. Act 1 is the buildup of your story. You introduce the main character, what their goal is. You give them a weakness, maybe, that you can play off later when they fix it. And you want to set the mood and the scene for what the movie is all about. Act 2 is going to be your main meat of the story. This is where your character goes out on his or her quest. They're pursued by the bad guys, and it's all the adventures. Like when you think about a movie, that's Act 2. Everything is falling into place, all that action. And then Act 3 is going to be your exciting conclusion. It's the final battle. It's when they find the treasure. It's when the guy gets the girl. It's your final payoff for the movie, and everyone can leave satisfied and happy with the movie that they've just watched. The Matrix, I find, is a great example of 3-act structure, and I actually do break it down in my book. So if you want to learn about that, pick up my book on Amazon, Indie Rebel, a Masterclass in Independent Filmmaking by Christopher Tempel, and you can see how I break down the Matrix in that. Also, one of my first short films, actually I'm going to call it my first digital short film, was called Ninja Nerd. That followed 3-act structure. The beginning featured a kid in high school getting beat up by bullies. Act 2 is he signs up for martial arts lessons and learns the, art of Kempo karate, which is the style that I do. Again, coming back to my X factors, right? This is something that I know. I also taught at the school too, so I had access to the school and students and stuff. And then Act 3 is he gets into a final confrontation with the bullies and beats the living tar out of them and lets them know, hey, I'm not someone to be messed with. And so that was my little short film, Ninja Nerd. Unfortunately, I don't have that online because the movie is basically a silent film. There's no dialogue in it. It's just scored with movie soundtracks. And those soundtracks get me copyright flags and stuff. So I don't have the ability to show it to you. But if you do know me personally, reach out to me and I can show it to you sometime if you're interested. So that is 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and an end, right? And it's not something that's completely dogmatic. You can also find 5-act structure, and some people might gravitate more towards that. But it is something that can be used successfully. Now, there's 2 other forms of screenplay structure that I like and have now started using more regularly. The first one, and the one I learned about a long time ago, is called the hero paradigm. And the hero paradigm refers more to about what the hero of your story goes through, and you apply that to 3-act structure or this other one I'm going to talk about called Save the Cat. The hero paradigm starts with a divine, a royal, or important birth. There's something important about your main character. If you're doing a drama, this is one you can sometimes skip out on, but you could also throw in a big twist where maybe it turns out that the hero of your story is the illegitimate child of somebody else. Like, there's ways you can still incorporate this into even like the dramas. Then they have a call to adventure. Something spurs them into action, and like they have to go about the whatever the task that lies ahead of them is. It could be the death of their parents or whatever. They're gonna find a mentor. The mentor figure is the wise old wizard that's gonna teach them the ways to and give them the strength and knowledge they need to go about their quest. Then you've got their trials. And the trials is the quest itself. It's going about fulfilling whatever they set out to do to begin with. And then finally, all heroes, mythologically speaking, either return successful, having conquested or conquered the things that they set out to conquest, or they die. And those are really the only two options for that. So they either have to be successful or they die. And at its most basic form, like think about Star Wars: A New Hope. Luke Skywalker fits that perfectly. He's the son of Darth Vader. His aunt and uncle are killed, and he realizes there's nothing left for him on Tatooine. He meets Ben Kenobi, who offers to train him in the ways of the Force. They then go about setting out to rescue a princess, which kind of came about with the call to adventure, because he's like, wow, she's beautiful. I don't know that she's my sister, but she's gorgeous, right? And then he succeeds by blowing up the Death Star, and the rebels are successful because of him. And you can extrapolate even more over the course of the original trilogy and pull a lot more into it. But just, from a single movie level, A New Hope fits it so great. And then finally, there's the Save the Cat formula. And this is one that's new to me. I was only just introduced to it about a year and a half ago. And it's something I've been trying out on my latest feature, The Devil's Game, which is the one that deals with Ouija boards. It is a more complex form of structure, but it's really good for figuring out like your timings of events, because you know that you need to break into act 2 by a certain point in your movie or it's just not going to work. And there's a key point for that. You've got deliberation, you've got bad guys close in, there's all sorts of things. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details. You can look it up online and find all the beats yourself. Just Google Save the Cat beats. And then if you really want to have fun, Google Save the Cat beat sheets. And they break down existing movies and show how it fits this form of narrative structure. Now, all three of the things we've just talked about, 3 acts, the hero paradigm, and Save the Cat, they're all designed to be used interchangeably and in conjunction with one another. So don't feel like you have to just stick with one. And this gets back to what I was talking about earlier. Originally, all I knew was 3-act structure. Then I learned the hero paradigm. Then I learned Save the Cat. And as I've learned over the years about this, my stories have improved in terms of quality, in like sounding like real stories and not just the ramblings that maybe these podcasts turn out to be sometimes. In all fairness, I am trying to move towards at least 3-act structure with these podcasts. I'm not fully there yet, but I am working on it to just make it flow well and that kind of thing. Now, let's jump back to Final Draft for a moment with the beat board. My current workflow and recommendation to other filmmakers that do have Final Draft would be to use the Save the Cat formula as your main screenplay structure. Create cards or sticky notes if you're still using freeform for each beat of your movie. Use the Save the Cat titles for each card. And then in the description, describe the beat as it applies to your film. So if the title of a beat is, break into 2, then in the description you would write how the movie breaks into act 2. And you extrapolate that to the rest of the beats from there. Now, what's cool about Final Draft is that when I have these beats broken out like this in the Save the Cat structure, Final Draft now has something called lanes and outlines up at the top of your screen. I can drag my cards up there and then stretch them out in time like a video editing timeline for how long each section should be. And there are calculators online telling you, if you want to be this formulaic about it, how long each section of Save the Cat should be based upon how long you want your screenplay to be. So if you're doing a 120-page screenplay, a 90-page screenplay, a 100-page screenplay, it doesn't matter. Plug in your data. It tells you how long each section or each beat should be. Now, when I flip back over to the writing page, which we're going to talk about next week, I can actually visually see where I'm at in my writing process. Am I staying on track? Are events happening as they should be happening based on what you would consider contemporary narrative structure for these kinds of films? So backtracking just slightly, when you've gone through and filled out your Save the Cat beats, whether it be in freeform or final draft, you should now have a complete roadmap that walks you through the entire film. Like, give yourself a round of applause and pat yourself on the back, because that's the first step to making this movie happen. Before you can even write the script, you need to know where you're going. I have written scripts before. I'm ashamed to say that I just started blindly. And those scripts I actually never finished because I didn't know where it was going and I didn't know how it was going to get there. So spend your blood, sweat, and tears in the planning phase of writing the script. Getting your story all laid out, making sure that there's a logical succession of events from A to B to C. And if you can do that, then you're going to be on the right track to success when we jump into next week's podcast of actually writing the script itself. So with that, we're going to call it for a day. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections of these podcasts. If you're able to, I think Spotify allows comments. I'm not sure about Apple Podcasts. I do need to look into that. But hopefully this gives you a little insight into my particular process. I'm not saying this is the only way or the correct way to do it. This is just what I have found works for me when it comes to planning my independent feature film. Again, thank you for listening to Indie Rebel, the podcast for independent filmmakers. My name is Christopher Tempel, and we will see you next time.